Bet Tammuz, June 21st. We are beginning Dirshu Daf Yomi Behalacha. We are beginning all the way at the bottom of Daf Havzain Amud Bet, Siman Kuf Mem Daled, Seif Daled. En Kolin leAdam Ehad Bishne Sifrei Torah. The same person may not get one aliyah in the first Sefer Torah and then get a second aliyah in the second Sefer Torah. Why? Mishum pegamo shel rishon. Because it will appear that there's a blemish, there's something wrong with the first Sefer Torah. Aval shlosha gavrei bishlosha sefarim. Kigon Rosh Chodesh Tevet shehal liyot b'Shabbat leka mishum pegam. However, if on a day when we have three Sifrei Torah, for example, Rosh Chodesh Tevet that falls out on Shabbat, there is no issue al pi halacha to have three different people read, meaning there is no issue to have a different person for each Sefer Torah read. We are not afraid that anyone's going to draw any conclusions, that there's anything invalid with any of the Sifrei Torah. Let's go to the Mishnah Brura. Bishne Sifrei Torah, ben binyan echad u ben bishne inyanim. Whether when reading from two Sifrei Torah, whether you're reading from the same subject matter in both of them, or two different subject matters, kegon b'Shabbat Rosh Chodesh or b'Yom Tov. On Shabbat Rosh Chodesh or on Yom Tov, we take out two Sifrei Torah. דדינה הוא שקוראים למפטיר בספר אחר הנגלל מקבר ומוכן לאותו מקום כדי שלא יצטרכו לגלול בציבור את הספר הראשון וכנזכר לאל בסעיף ג'. The halacha is that when we have a maftir, that we read from two Sifrei Torah, that there's a second Sefer Torah already prepared at the proper place of the maftir. This is done in order so that we don't have to roll the first Sefer Torah to the maftir. En likrot lemi she'ala b'harona she'alehu gam ke lemaftir b'sefer hasheni. The halacha is that the last person that was just called up, he may not get called up for maftir in the second Sefer Torah. Afilu en sham acher sheyodea leaftir, even if he's the only one that knows how to read the haftarah. Why? Denireh kematil dofer b'sefer Torah rishona. By calling up the last person that was called up in the first Sefer Torah, by calling that person up for maftir in the second Sefer Torah, you are casting aspirations. Denireh kematil dofi b'sefer Torah rishona mipnei shehi hasera or she'ar pasul. It appears that you have some kind of suspicion if you give that last person an aliyah in the second Sefer Torah, that last person that was called up in the first Sefer Torah, you give him the maftir in the second Sefer Torah, it may appear that there is something wrong with the first Sefer Torah. Either a letter is missing, a word is missing, or anything else that would invalidate the Sefer Torah. Rather, what do? If he's the only person that knows how to read the Haftarah, Ela yiglelu ha-Sefer Torah rishona ad sheyagiu lesham. What you do is that in the first Sefer Torah, you roll the Sefer Torah till you get to the maftir, and you continue reading the maftir with that person that you called up. But you don't give him a second aliyah. You don't give him another aliyah in the second Sefer Torah. V'im yirtzu likrot lemaftir mehakeruim shekodem aharon. What about if you're not giving the last person that you called up in the first Sefer Torah the maftir to call him up as maftir in the second Sefer Torah? Rather, you want to call up somebody that was already called up, somebody previously that was already called up, not the last person that was called up. Hamagen Avraham matir. According to the Magen Avraham, this is mutar to do. You may not call up in the second Sefer Torah the last person that was called up in the first Sefer Torah, but you may call up somebody who was called previously before the last person in the first Sefer Torah. De'en shayach pegam ela keshekore bishnehem ze achar ze. We're not afraid that there will be that anyone's going to suspect of anything wrong, of any blemish, only when you call the same person, meaning the last person that you called up in the first Sefer Torah, you immediately call him up again in the second Sefer Torah. Deyomru lama lo kara barishon, ela shehaser haparasha bo, People are going to say, why didn't he read it in the first Sefer Torah? Must be there's something wrong. אבל כשהפסיק בינתיים באיש אחר, הווה לאטה כקורא מחדש. However, if there's someone in between, meaning you're not calling up the last person that you called up in the first Sefer Torah, you're not calling up that person in the second Sefer Torah, rather you're calling up, let's say you want to call up someone that was previously called up. That means there's someone in between that was called up. In that case, the Yomud Lam, אבל כשהפסיק בינתיים באיש אחר, הווה לאטה כקורא מחדש. It is considered a whole new reading, and no one's going to have any issues. No one's going to draw any erroneous conclusions. והבח אוסר, וכן מצדד העלייה רבה לדינה. However, the Bach argues on the Magen Avraham, and the Aliyah Rabbah agrees with the Bach, that anyone that was called up in the first Sefer Torah may not get an Aliyah in the second Sefer Torah. מטעם דאקתי יאמרו דנודע עתה פסולו של הספר ראשון ולקח קרא באחרת. Why? Because still people will draw erroneous conclusions. They're going to say, why is a person that was already called up in the first Sefer Torah, why is he getting an Aliyah in the second Sefer Torah? Because they found a problem. They found an issue that invalidates in the first Sefer Torah, and therefore they're calling him up again to read from another Sefer Torah. ואך בשמחת תורה מצדד העלייה רבה, ויש להקל בזה כמגן אברהם. The Aliyah Rabbah, however, says that we are allowed to be lenient. Like the Magen Avraham said, according to the Magen Avraham, well, you're not allowed to call the last person that was called up in the first Sefer Torah. You're not allowed to call him up again immediately in the second Sefer Torah. You may call up somebody, though, that was previously called up before the last person. The Aliyah Rabbah only agrees to the Magen Avraham on Simchat Torah. But any other time of the year, you may not do that. Demutar likot lahatan bereshit mi she'ala kevar besefer Torah rishona mehamat yesh lo od snifim le'atir sham. For example, you are allowed to call up for Hatan Bereshit on Simchat Torah someone that already got an Aliyah in the first Sefer Torah, because there are other conditions, there are other reasons for this to be permitted. Shlosha gavre bishlosha sefarim, vehu hadin tre gavre bitre sefarim. There is no issue when you have 3 Sifrei Torah. For example, Rosh Chodesh Tevet on Shabbat, there is no issue for a different person to read in each Sefer Torah. The same way there is no issue for a different person to read in each of the 3 Sefer Torah. There is no issue also when you have 2 Sifrei Torah. You can have a different person read in each one. ואם ירצה הראשון מהשלושה לקרוא בספר תורה השלישית למפטיר, and if you want that the person who read in the first Sefer Torah to read in the third Sefer Torah, the Maftir, Talya beplukta abach u'magen Avraham shekatavti mitchila. This is dependent on the argument between the Bach and the Magen Avraham that I just wrote about. According to the Magen Avraham, that would be permitted. According to the Bach, that might be an issue. That would be an issue. Shehal aliyot b'Shabbat, she'echad koreh b'inyano shel yom. That one person reads regarding the subject matter, regarding the parasha of the day. When you have 3 Sifrei Torah, Rosh Chodesh, Tevet on Shabbat. She'echad koreh b'inyano shel yom, v'asheni b'shel Rosh Chodesh. The second person reads the kriya that has to do with Rosh Chodesh, v'ashel ishi b'shel Chanukah lemaftir, and the shel ishi reads regarding the inyan of Chanukah. Leka mishum pegam afilu be'inyan echad. There is no issue, there is no problem. We're not afraid that there's going to be a blemish, even if all 3 Sifrei Torah are talking about the same subject matter. Vayin bepri megadim. Siman kuf mem hey seif aleph. Bimei chachmei haGemara hayu nohagim letargem kedei sheyavinu ha'am. In the time of the Chachamim of the Gemara, in the time of the Gemara, the minhag was that they used to translate the kriya in order for the people to understand. En hakoreh rashay likrot leturgeman yoter mipasuk ehad. Now, when this minhag was in effect, there were certain rules. The Baal Koreh was not allowed to read more than one pasuk at a time for the translator to translate. Ve'en hametargem rashay letargem ad sheyichle hapasuk mipi hakoreh. The translator was not allowed to begin to translate until the Baal Koreh completely finished and concluded the pasuk. Ve'en hakoreh rashay likrot pasuk acher ad sheyichle hatargum mipi hametargem. Ve'en hakoreh, the Baal Koreh, is not allowed to start reading the next pasuk until the translator finished translating the previous pasuk. ואין הקורא רשאי להגביה קולו יותר מהמתרגם ולא המתרגם יותר מהקורא. The Baal Koreh's voice is not allowed to be louder than the translator's voice, and the translator's voice is not allowed to be louder than the Baal Koreh. ואין הקורא רשאי לסייע למתרגם. The Baal Koreh is not allowed to help the translator translate. Why not? שלא יאמרו תרגום כתוב בתורה. Because we're afraid that if we allow the Baal Koreh to help the translator translate, people might come to say that there's Targum, that Aramaic is in the Torah. Aleph, let's go into the Mishnah Brura. Nohagim letargem bilshon targum. The minhag was to translate the Kriyat Torah, was for a translator to read out the translation in Aramaic, ki leshonam haya aramit, because their day-to-day language was Aramit. Mipi hametargem, והכל כדי שלא יתבלבלו הציבור ויוכלו לשמוע כל הפרשה ככתבה מפי הקורא. The Baal Koreh was not allowed to start reading the next pasuk until the translator finished translating. Why? It says, all in order for the tzibur not to get confused, for them to hear the parasha properly from the Baal Koreh. Afterwards, they will understand the translation properly from the translator. Why does the voice, the sound of the voice, have to be the same? One cannot raise, the Baal Koreh's voice cannot be louder than the metargem, than the translator, and the translator's voice cannot be louder than the Baal Koreh. Tichtiv, Moshe, Tichtiv. Moshe yedaber va'elokim ya'anenu bekol. What is the word v'hai bekol? Hainu bekolo shel Moshe. This means that God's voice had to be the same, could not be louder than Moshe Rabbeinu. When it says va'elokim ya'anenu bekol, he would answer the same, that his voice would not be any louder than Moshe Rabbeinu. Bet katan metargem al yedei gadol. A child may translate for the reading of a grown-up. Aval eno kavod legadol sheitargem al yedei katan. But it is not proper kavod for a gadol, for a grown-up to translate for the reading of a katan. Ha'ina seif gimel ha'ina lo nahagu letargem. Today the minhag is no longer to translate. Mishum dema to'elet betargum kiman shen mevinim oto. What would it help that we would have a translator for the Baal Koreh into Aramit, as we don't understand the language? It is not the language that we speak today. She'en mevinim oto ve'en lomar nilmad mehem lefaresh gam anachnu la'am belashon sheyavinu. And we don't say that, okay, let's not translate it into Aramit, but we should translate the Kriyan to whatever language people understand. Deshani Targum. Why were they allowed to translate it into Aramit as the Baal Koreh was reading, that the Baal Koreh would read one pasuk and then would be translated to Aramim? Shenitkan beruach hakodesh. Because Aramit is different than any other language that was formulated al pi ruach hakodesh. V'ayin b'magen ha'giburim shevi b'shem tashpet shegam ata reshut letargem bilshon targum av shen mevinim oto mishum shenitkan beruach hakodesh ela she'en hatargum me'akev. The Tashbetz, the Magen Giburim brings in the name of the Tashbetz, that today we still have permission to translate the Kriya into Aramit, even though we don't understand it. Why? Because once again, it was formulated al pi ruach hakodesh. However, it is not me'akev. We do not need that in order to fulfill the chiyuv of kriyat Torah. Bezrat Hashem, we will continue with Siman Kuf Memvav tomorrow.